Good afternoon, everyone. Evening, if you're on the other side of the world. Welcome to Beyond the Outer Realm, a spin-off of the main show, The Outer Realm. I know you guys are used to hearing the regular intro. This is quite new for me, even though we've been at it now a few months compared to a few years. So anyway, welcome to all of you. We are broadcasting on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 FM from the Gulf Coast, 107.7 FM from beautiful New Orleans. Tonight, we have a very special guest who's new for the Outer Realm and for Beyond the Outer Realm. And this is Mr. Simon Bown. And we're going to be talking about, this is quite exciting. We talk about this a lot, and I know a lot of our listeners and viewers really enjoy it, but he has a book called Verified Near-Death Experiences, Proof of the Afterlife. And it's quite a journey into everything that he does. He's not a stranger to any of this, but I'll let him tell you all about it. And let's get into this book. Hello, Simon.
Hi, it's really nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. It's such an honor. Thank you. Well, I don't even know where to get started because just reading up on everything that you do, it's like you are totally involved in the field of high strangeness as a show host yourself and a hypnotist, which is interesting. So where would you like to start? How does one usually, for me, it started off with paranormal experiences. How did your journey begin? Your humble beginning, so to speak.
It's difficult to say, really. I've just always been interested in paranormal, supernatural. When I was 10 years old, I'd go to the local library and get books out, whether it's Bigfoot or ghosts or UFOs or whatever. And over time, my interests kind of got to two different things, which was the afterlife and UFOs. And so when it got to the 1980s, I was reading books, stuff, Raymond Booney's book, Life After Life, and
that was
then
a good
things
book.
like, the Andresen books, Betty Andresen, who had these amazing ET experiences. And then there was Travis Walton's book and Whitley Strieber and all sorts of people. And then I was having my own experiences as well. And I was in London, and I used to go to the College of Psychic Studies, which was formed by the Society for Psychical Research. Well, it must be probably 140 years ago now. So they had a great library there.
Yes.
And it was a college, but I wasn't a student. But there were loads of people there who were studying to be mediums and channels and do past life regression and all sorts of things. And you could go and pay a little bit of money and they could practice on you. So I could go there once every 2 weeks and sit with a medium or a channel. And it wasn't that I was looking for evidence for a deceased loved one was still around. It was like I was an investigator. I wanted to see what would come up and see if there could be stuff that was really evidential of an afterlife. And I did that for a while, and it was there that I was taken through my first past life regression when it was like 1987. And over the years I've been taken through more of them, and eventually I became a clinical hypnotherapist, and now that's what I do. I specialize in past life regression. But also had a couple of UFO sightings and psychic things happen and stuff coming up while I was hypnotized, and also some weird stuff happening with feathers. And so it's been a long sorry?
Maybe visitations. They say with feathers, sometimes it's a visitation, perhaps from a loved one,
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what happened. I recorded an interview with a woman who'd written a book about angels, and I'm not religious. I never have been religious.
Same, yeah. Yeah.
And so when they talk about angels, for me, it was a bit of, I don't know, I think we're going a bit too far here. And you think of the big white wings and wearing a white robe and all that kind of angel stuff. But she said, no, if you see a feather, that shows that they're around. And I was like, oh, okay. The next day, I'm walking down the street, and this white feather just floats out of the sky right in front of me.
Mhm.
Saw it, and I thought, "Yeah, okay, it's just a
So, is
coincidence."
this a test? Yeah, someone's trying to make a believer out of you.
Yeah, so a few weeks later, I was talking to a medium for my
Mhm,
podcast, and I recorded the episode with her.
mhm,
We finished recording, and I told her about this thing with the feather, and she's like, "Oh yeah, feathers. That's a sign, you know." And I finished that call, and I went to see my daughter, a teenager, in her bedroom, and she's a very clean teenager. She doesn't have mess everywhere like
mhm.
her sister does, but
Yeah. Polar
I went into
opposites.
the yeah, I went into the room, and there's this feather sitting in the middle of the floor.
Mm,
And I said to my daughter, "Where did that come from?" And she looks down from her laptop, and she's going, "Well, I don't know," and then goes back to her video game. And I thought, "Well, now that's weird." I was just talking to a medium about
mhm,
feathers showing up in a weird way, and a
mhm,
feather shows up in a weird way. So go
mhm,
forward a few months, and I visiting a medium locally, and sitting opposite her. We're in these big comfy armchairs, and there's very clean carpet between us. And she does about an hour of mediumship, and she's really good.
mhm,
And she finishes that, and we start talking. And I mentioned the feather thing. She
mhm.
says, "Look at the floor." And in between us, there was a feather in the middle of the floor.
Wow.
But the thing was, that whole hour she was doing her mediumship, there was no feather there, and neither of us got up to go anywhere or do anything.
Mhm,
And that was the point where I was kind of like, my brain stopped. I could not compute, where did this feather come from?
mhm.
And I was wondering about, if the spirit guides or spiritual beings were trying to send me a message, and they tried before and then they tried again. It's almost like they're slapping their foreheads. It's like,
This
what do
is
we got to do to get through to this guy?
yes.
But yeah, so
Shake you a little bit. That's
yeah,
fascinating. That is
so the third
fascinating.
time, yeah.
So what do you think about it now? Are you a little bit more of a believer, or do you just it's something ethereal, obviously trying to get your attention? Because that last one, I mean, for something to just materialize next to you when neither one of you have moved is very interesting. Because you just can't really rule I mean, you have to rule everything out pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I get from it now, and after talking to other people, um, I get the impression that angels are more like a kind of some kind of spiritual being that have a
Mhm.
specific role. So you
Mhm.
might have spirit guides, and then
Mhm.
there's their thing they call the council of elders,
Mhm.
and your spirit guides may have incarnated a lot, and that's how come they're guides now, because they've got so much experience with it. But
Mhm.
angels don't ever incarnate. They've got a different role, and they do different things.
Mhm.
So that kind of sits better with me than thinking about these religious figures with the wings.
Yes. Well, I mean, if you think about even what real like the wheel of Ezekiel, for example, if you get into that, because I've studied a lot of different faiths just because of people I've worked with. You have to have an understanding, or at least a small understanding of their religious background of sorts. Some believe that real angels, especially archangels, don't look anything like they're not humanoid. They're these crazy wheels with eyes everywhere and just feathers everywhere. Like still the feathers, but they're not actually humanoid. And of course, as you know, in the field of ufology, those just call them light beings.
Yeah, yeah, and when I take people through past life regression, which I do
Yeah.
3 or 4 a week of these sessions.
Yes.
Part of it is I always take the people to the life between lives. So we'll spend part of the session looking at past lives,
Mhm.
and in that space between lives, I hoped we encounter their spirit guide, and most of the time they do.
Mhm.
And so we can talk to the spirit guide and ask them all sorts of questions. But occasionally people say, I don't think it's a spirit guide. I think it's an angel. And
Mhm.
they might just say it's a ball of light, or they get a sense of a powerful presence. And
Mhm.
occasionally they've said, "This is Michael," or "This is Gabriel,"
Mhm.
or something like that when it comes to the angels. And
Mhm.
that can be a fascinating thing when that turns up. It doesn't happen very often.
Mhm. The whole past life. I've done, maybe a handful of regressions, and it's very interesting. But I've had them come through in other ways as well. It's interesting to think about past lives per se. Makes you think like, is there a reason why we can't remember them? Like, in your opinion? Like, for me, I would think all the loves we have encountered, but the losses at the same time, maybe feeling the sense like we come here and we have this void, this sense of like we don't belong here, that we belong somewhere else, that something is missing. Do you find there's a reason we shouldn't really remember? Or, you know, like, I mean, because it kind of sucks in a way going through life feeling
Mhm.
like I don't belong here. Somebody in my life is missing and they just can't quite piece it together.
Yeah, I think we come here to learn everything there is to be human, and we go through so many lives that have so many experiences
Mhm,
to um, aid our soul in progressing.
mhm,
And if you were born and you were aware of all your past lives, that would kind of negate this opportunity to learn from a clean slate.
mhm.
It's, and some people might think, oh, I've lived loads of times, this life's not going very well, I'll just end it and do another one.
Yes,
And
yes.
so yeah, so you live all these different lives. You're
Mhm,
male, you're female, you're different races, different sexualities, and
mhm,
you live in different parts of the world, and it's a big learning experience. But
mhm,
also on the side of that, I think that we might think of Earth too much and think it all happens here, but
mhm,
it doesn't. Earth's just one place where we incarnate, and we can
mhm,
incarnate in all sorts of different places around the universe.
mhm.
And my
Earth is a
past life
tough one.
regressions, yeah, yeah. But in my regressions, I have had a few people go to past lives on other planets, and that's
Mhm,
not something we were trying to do. It's you just say,
mhm,
okay, now you're going to enter a past life. Where are you? And
mhm.
I don't tell them which past life to go to.
Right, right. I guess it's whichever one you're resonating with at that specific time. It's been difficult because I've even had readings and people's like, "Oh, this person is from this life of yours," and then I feel it's kind of like I'm apologizing because it's like I'm so sorry, like I don't know, I don't remember,
Mm.
and it makes for an awkward situation. And she goes, "Oh, she seems very disappointed." Well, so am I. So it'd be kind of nice to be able to come through with some of it, because that's one thing that I hear a lot of people talk about when it comes to things like that. It's just like, if we don't remember where we had problems that we're trying to maybe evolve through some of the things that we've been stagnant with. Because if you don't remember, how you're supposed to know? And I laugh. I'm like, well, I think it just defeats the purpose of growing. If but in the same respect, I understand their point of view, because like you don't want to repeat it. You want to evolve from it. But
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of people, clients who have lived a life, and the spirit guide has said to them afterwards, "Sorry, you didn't learn the lesson. You're just going to have to go back and do another life and work on
yeah.
it again."
Yeah, I've been tricked. Just, yes, which I guess leads us into, I mean, quite different than having a near-death experience, but some people do have near-death experiences and come back completely transformed. So, that pushes them into a different journey, form of evolution. So, I mean, obviously, if you're doing, hypnosis work, have you worked with people who have had near death experiences trying to, some people remember, other people do not. And it's quite different for everyone. But then you still have some of that typical stuff, going down the tunnel, ending up in a white room, or ending up on the river Styx, whichever the case may be. I've heard various stories with that.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people who wanted to be regressed back to a point where they died and they were resuscitated to
Mhm.
find out, did they have a near-death experience, because they remember nothing.
Yes.
And with one of them, we got some glimpses of something, and the other one we didn't.
Mhm.
But there is times when people are in a near-death experience and they're shown stuff, and there may be a spiritual being with them or a spirit guide who'll say, "We're not
Mhm.
going to let you remember all this stuff."
Mm.
We'll let you remember enough so that you know this was real, but
Mhm.
everything else we're gonna block. And I think sometimes people have near-death experiences and the whole thing is blocked, and that
Hmm.
people only remember it later. There's a
Mhm.
guy in my book who only remembered his 15 years after it occurred.
Wow. That would be hard. Again, just trying to, if you know that you've had one. I've had one and close with a second. And I remember them, but very vaguely, very vaguely. So I don't have the details. My co-host on the Other Realm, Amelia, who's had six, and she remembers hers like my
Uh,
my my partner has had one very, very vividly, and he is on a boat with all these people, and they're going down. You see, it's not like this big dark foreboding place, but it's this whole other thing. I'm like, do you remember all of this so vividly? And some of us are
I
just
know.
like grasping for whatever bits we can take from it, you know?
Yeah, it can be such an impact on people and change them so much,
Mhm,
particularly when they have a life review. And
mhm.
I've heard that 70% of people who have a near-death experience end up getting divorced afterwards.
Wow. Why do you think that is?
I think because when you have one, it can change you so much. I
Mhm,
suppose there are people who might be very materialistic in a way. They really want to make as much money as they can and have
mm,
a great career and a big house and a great
mm,
car. And they have a near death experience and come back and say, I don't want that stuff anymore. They become very spiritual and they
mhm,
don't see those things as important. But
mhm.
if their partner is saying, hang on a second, I like the money, I like the
Yeah,
big house,
yes.
that could be a problem.
Yes, I could see that. Yeah, I did speak with one woman that this happened to, and she said she came back. She goes, "I literally sold everything, gave away everything, and I bought a little car. Whatever the car could fit, that was it. And I traveled around, and she was a professional as well. Like she had a doctorate, and just and just totally the other way. She goes, I have never felt more free.
Yeah,
So,
it's that thing 'cause, you realize what's really important
mhm,
and how we're all connected and, how much you can affect people by your behavior.
mhm. Absolutely. What's the most common thing that you hear when you are, well, for the book, when you were interviewing these people with their near death experiences?
Well, I suppose the common things are basically they have that out of body experience where they may see their body. Some people seem to be instantly in, some kind of afterlife location.
Mm-hmm.
But they all talk about, their vision being so much better than normal and their hearing so much better normal, and it seems like their intellect is much faster,
Mm-hmm.
and they see colors they've never seen before, and it's like their consciousness is released from this horrible physical brain that's slowing it down,
Mm-hmm.
and they're the most common things. But then the other things, like say the tunnel experience, not everybody gets that. Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody gets a life review. Not everybody meets deceased loved ones or spiritual beings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the
And,
basis of my book is this: when they have the out of body experience and they see something, and when they come back, they talk about it, and the people say, "Yeah, that definitely happened, but
mm-hmm.
it happened while you were dead. How could you know about that?" So
Mm-hmm.
that's that out of body experience kind of thing that I look for, when I was putting the book together.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting how everything connects, full circle. I heard an interview that you'd done where you put in insight into, again, out of body experiences or near death experiences, and you felt that maybe they somehow connected to alien phenomenon.
Yeah, yeah. There's one case in my book. A woman in a near-death experience is in this incredible landscape,
Mm,
and to the left of her, there's all these people wearing clothes from all different eras in human civilization, and there's people that look like they might be from the future.
hmm,
But she says there's also beings there that they're just not human,
hmm,
and she realized that these are all her past and future lives, and she could sense a small part of her soul in all of them. And she didn't communicate with them there. And on the
Mhm.
other side of her was her family, who are still alive, and she realized that that was her family's higher selves, her husband and children,
That's
and even
crazy.
a pet dog that was there.
That's
And
insane.
it, yeah, and it's weird how it connects up with ET contact as well, near-death experiences, particularly with the after effects.
Mhm.
Uh, the after effects of near-death experiences are the same after effects as people who have ET encounters, what they used to call alien abduction. But I think the phrase alien abduction is going out of fashion now.
Mhm. Well, abductions, I know some people find it, you know, I I'm an experiencer. I've been a lifetime experiencer through my lineage. I had the stories passed down, and I had a lot of paranormal experiences, realizing just how much the two intertwined. And I started questioning over the last few years, where I was really starting to recall things, and as experiences are still happening, I'm very comfortable with it, and it's very hard for me to say abduction, and I think that comes from maybe the intrusion part of things, because so much of it happens when you're in the safety where you should feel safe in your own bed, boudoir, bedroom, whatever the case may be. It's just your safe place, and you are feeling the most vulnerable, and things happen. I think that's perhaps where that comes from. It's like we're just being taken, and some people have horrific experiences, but does that come from are they fighting it? Are they scared? Are they, like what is causing them to, if you're going to be aggressive, they're going to defend themselves in one form
Yeah.
or another. If I don't recall, because I don't fear it. So you know, I don't know. I think it's different from everyone. Contactee sounds a little better than abductee, experiencer. So I could see that. But if you have a near death experience, and these beings are around you, would they not still be around you even though, you're having this experience? Could this be some of the stuff, or, some of the occurrences with people who are seeing those around them, in
Well,
your
this is,
opinion?
are you saying being in a near-death experience and having the ETs around you?
Well, yeah, if they're around you, I've had them around a lot, whether it's during the day or at night. So if I was having a near-death experiences, my curiosity is, would they still be there even though I'm not in the physical? I'm just kind of bouncing out for a little bit. I would think that it would be easier for me to connect with them, but they would still be there.
Yeah, yeah, that's the impression I get.
Mhm,
There's a lady I interviewed on my podcast. This is ages ago, but and she was a psychic and a medium, and that's why she came on. But she told
mm,
me that she woke up one night standing next to her bed, and there were four greys at the bottom of her bed.
mm,
And this really freaked her out, and she
yeah.
looked round and her body was still in the bed. So, she's having this out of body experience, and that really made her jump, and suddenly she was back in her body and she sat up, and those four
Mm,
greys aren't there. So they must have been in that space, that in between space, and not
yeah.
physically there.
Yes. Yes. It's only happened to me one time, and I was fully awake when it happened. It was that gray was full on there. I was just like so close I could have touched it, and I'm like wide awake. I'm not out of the body. So I'm definitely thinking if you're out of the body, you're going to see a heck of a lot more. But it would be like having an OBE. You just, you're when you're no longer restricted by the physical, and you're somehow, on an ethereal level. I imagine that you would see everybody waiting.
Yeah,
You know?
I've talked to people who've had out of body experiences, and I just the other day I talked to a guy who went to the Monroe Institute a few times, and now he's
Mhm,
one of their trainers. And there was weird things that seemed to happen as well. He said that he had this out of body experience, and he was in his own apartment,
mhm,
and it was a hardwood floor, and the walls were blue. But he
mhm.
said actually he's got a carpet on the floor, and the walls are white. So how did that happen? It wasn't
Mm.
that he was in a different time period or something.
Mhm.
And he also talks about coming across people who have died,
Mhm.
and they're still on the earth doing things, and they don't realize they've died.
Mhm.
And there's another guy I talked to who said he was out of body and he was on the street, and there's 4 guys sitting on this park bench having a beer, and he realized all 4 of them were dead. And he went to them and he was saying, "You know, you could move on to the light. You don't have to stay on Earth." But they
Mhm.
were said, like, "Well, we're having a good time. We're having a beer. We're sitting around having a laugh. Why would we want to go into the light?"
Mhm.
And
It's
he also
good.
talks about a
It's a good
soul
question.
retrieval. Yeah,
Wow, the soul retrieval, that is, I think, what gets people a bit funky because
yeah.
there's some researchers, and I don't know, you've interviewed a lot of people as well. So I like to pose this question to people who have an understanding of near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences, things like that. So I've had guests and I've also read, blips on this once it was first presented by a guest. We're so conditioned to go to the light, fear the darkness, and always gravitate to the light. Is it possible that upon death that we're being forced into a reincarnation cycle, the cycle back here, as opposed to going to, let's say, the real ethereal realm where you can pretty much go anywhere? Some people will say, because I've had it said, well, sure, it's almost like the birthing process again, and you see your loved ones there. And I'm like, that's horrific. Just, yeah, I don't want to know. I don't know if I want to do that again. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, should we be trying to, like Heidi had mentioned earlier on, look for the avenue that you feel, that's comfortable to you, that feels right to you? Why are we always so conditioned just to keep going and then we recycle back?
But there's this thing that we reincarnate to help the progression of our soul and learning different things.
Right.
And it's a thing where your soul wants to incarnate. You
Yeah.
might have a life on earth that's awful and
Hmm.
think to yourself, well, if reincarnation's real, there's no way I'm coming back here. But your
Yes.
soul will look at it and think, man, this is such a great learning experience. I'm definitely coming back here.
It's because we can't remember it. So we don't know that this is a great thing.
Yeah.
So,
But I also
yeah.
think that, time doesn't exist in the afterlife.
Mhm.
So our lives aren't actually happening one after the other.
Mhm.
I kind of see this analogy of a tree, and the
Mhm.
tree trunk is the soul, and the leaves are all the different lives. So as the
Yes.
tree experiences all the leaves in the same moment, our
Mhm.
soul is experiencing all the lives in the same moment.
Mhm.
But also, this thing of going into the light isn't
Mhm.
something that shows up so
Mhm.
much. There's
Yes.
lots of people have a near-death experience, and they'll be in a dark void, and
Yes.
some say it's a wonderful place to be. It's so,
Mm.
comforting. Others will
Mhm.
say they were terrified in the dark void, and
Mhm.
they move somewhere else. There
Mhm.
was a woman I have in my books. Said she was like she spent eternity in the dark void, and
Hmm.
she was just happy to just be there, and she'd forgotten about her earthly life and being human.
Mhm.
And other people, when they die and have a near-death experience, they're instantly in another location. There's no
Mhm.
going through the tunnel. There's no of this
Mhm.
idea of going towards the light.
Mhm.
They're just alive. Then they're
Mhm.
in this incredible city or in this incredible countryside,
Mhm.
and there isn't any going to the light there.
That's interesting. I wonder if that's part maybe from people who are very conditioned in their earthly life. Because religion often will condition us, or media will condition us to fear one thing and not fear another, like the light and the darkness. Yet you have this woman who just feels so comforted in the darkness. I love the darkness. Like, I love being out under the stars. I just love how quiet it is, and you can just spend some time to just reflect. It's very comforting. So I'd be one of those people, I think, you know. Um, Caroline says, near death experiences are comforting to hear. Oh, this is nice. Question. Is going into the light a one-way trip, or do we have choices? Choice is fundamental to us in life. Why would it change in death not to have choice? I think this is pretty much what you were just talking about, people who just seem to move around.
Yeah, and also, I kind of feel like, you have no choice in a way. You're in a dark void and then a
Mm,
light comes to you. Where else are you gonna go?
mhm,
I mean, we're kind of conditioned to be in light because we
yeah,
have sight and we can be very visual people, and you don't wanna spend the
mhm,
rest of eternity just in complete darkness. But
wandering
also
around.
it seems to be that people say the light is incredibly loving,
Mhm,
almost so much that the word love isn't enough to describe the feeling and how
mhm.
good it is for that light.
I asked my uncle who passed away and came through, and I said, because he never feared death. He was an amazing medium, and he did in the end. He got sick, and he started, I think, to fear it a little bit. And when he passed away, and I was able to communicate with him, I said, "Is it everything that you thought it would be?" And he said, "It's more." He goes, "It's spirit energy." He goes, "Lights." He said, "Everywhere." He goes, "It's amazing." I was like, I had never quite heard that. Lights everywhere, spirit energy, and and so I was obviously very happy to hear that, that he had made it and he was comforted, and because of that type of fear. So I guess my question is, do you find when people, if they know they're going to pass, and I know this steps a little bit outside of near death, unless there's a concern that they might pass during a surgery, for example. Do you think that sort of paves the way for what kind of an experience they would have or where they would go, going on board with the fear as opposed to just, let's say, car accident or dying on the table during a surgery without expecting it, just popping out so quick? Like, are there differences between those 2?
I don't think so. There's a woman in my book who had, this terrible premonition she was going to
Oh.
die when she gave birth,
Mhm.
and she did die when she gave birth.
Mm.
And she was terrified of this in the months beforehand, and she was talking to all her doctors and trying to make sure that they had more blood there for her, and there was a defibrillator in the room and all these different things.
Mhm.
And when she did die, it wasn't a terrible experience. It was a wonderful experience getting into that afterlife
Mhm.
space. And
Mhm.
I think the place you go to when you have a near-death experience is
Mhm.
tailored for you to give you exactly what you need.
Mhm.
And I don't know who's doing that. I've talked to researchers, and the thing that I think is that it's kind of like your spirit guides.
Mhm.
They know what you need, they know you so well. But I talked to other
Mhm.
researchers who said, no, it's your subconscious. It's all built out of your own mind. But
Mhm.
I find that the space people go to in a near death experience can be kind of the theater of the near
Mhm.
death experience. This
Mhm.
isn't for everybody, but I did interview a lady called Nancy Rhines,
Mhm.
and she was in this incredible landscape. She said there were mountains there and forests, and it was wonderful. And she was with this lady, she said was one of her spirit team. And
Mm.
she turned around, and the whole landscape, everything was just dissolving away into a mist.
Hmm.
And the spirit said to her, yeah, this was all created just for you, just for this experience right now, to,
Hmm.
to give you what you need.
Mhm.
And there's also this idea of, people say you go to the space that resonates with you or is
Mhm.
on your frequency.
Mhm.
I talked
I
to a
could see
guy the
that.
other day. Sorry, go on.
No, I could understand that. I relate because I work with frequency vibration, and I'm completely in sync with that, so I could see that being a thing.
Yeah, because the guy the other day I talked to for the podcast, he was saying he thinks that, say you're very strong religious, so you're a Catholic, it
Mhm.
might be when you die, that's your frequency, that's what you resonate with, and you'll go to a place where it's nothing but Catholics, and
Mhm.
it's a Catholic heaven, and it
Mhm.
takes time for you to acclimatize, and eventually you realize, hang on, there's more here. It's not just
Just this.
Catholic people that should be in the afterlife or are in the afterlife.
Mhm. Yeah, see, so again, we have that level of conditioning. Because also with Catholicism, there's a belief that everybody ends up in purgatory till Judgment Day. So what's that like? You're
Yeah,
just kind of roaming
yeah,
around waiting for the next thing or the next move. But to me, again, that would be kind of unnerving, just kind of sitting there spending all this time in a place wondering what's next. Because in their belief, it's like going up or you're going down. Where's the elevator going to go? So I don't know. It could be a little bit frightening. Um,
yeah, yeah.
um,
But there's people who are very strongly religious who have a near-death experience, and
mhm,
there's no religious flavor,
no.
content to their experience. And there's atheists who will say they meet Jesus in their near-death experience. So
Mhm.
that's not conditioning, is it? That's what's going on there.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. Yet I've seen atheists, because I've helped different people, move on, things of that nature, and they just roam around. They don't know what to do. And one was a friend of a friend, and I'm just like, we're just looking at him, go, what are you doing? It's like, I don't know. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. Oh,
Yeah.
well, let us help you along. So I guess there's a degree of that guides us, obviously, in the afterlife. It's like, where do you go from that point if you have no belief system? Something presents itself, would you even know instinctively to move towards it? You know?
Yeah, I know. I mean, there are a lot of people who say that in their
Mhm,
near-death experience, when they die, there's somebody there waiting for them,
mhm,
whether it's somebody they know or it's a spirit guide, or
mhm,
it's like they have that tunnel.
mhm.
But
Yes.
there are other people I've talked to who've had distressing near-death experiences, or neutral ones.
Mhm,
So I imagine that if you do die permanently, that
mhm,
those can be
mhm,
there. But the impression I get is you'll always be lifted out of that. There
mhm,
are spirits who kind of dedicate themselves to helping
mhm,
the lower levels and getting people out of that.
mhm. Um, Wayne says he was responding to someone in the chat, but I know this story. He goes, I was in a hospital waiting room when I passed out, found myself on a wooden sailing ship in a storm with others. They all had black raincoats on. And then he goes on, because, YouTube only lets you write so much at a time. He goes, the water was rough, but the ship was steady. We were heading towards a lighthouse, and the beam of light went right through the ship to where the captain, I guess, was at the back. He was in a black hooded garment. And then he says, the light went into his face, but it was so bright I couldn't make out any features. It was all very quiet, though it should have been quite loud. There's an experience. A little bit not
Yeah.
so comforting. But then he says, it was at that moment I heard a pleasant woman's voice in my right ear say to me, do you want to stay or go? I thought of my children in a flash. I was back in the hospital room with many people around. So yeah, I wouldn't think that's, but I guess comforting, it's like it was all quiet. It was, there was still the presence of light. So when you say, some people just find themselves in a dark place, it's quiet. Somehow, knowing Wayne, I know I don't think he was very comforted by that experience, but, interesting, super interesting. Um, Mark has a question. Do you think experiencers are visiting on an astral level, dream state, or do they actually physically go? I think that we were talking about ET at that point. Is that right, Z-Sun? Just correct me if I'm wrong on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with this the abduction thing or ET encounters, it's a bit of this and a bit of that. It does seem that some people may be taken, uh, say spiritually, their consciousness goes, but then
Mm.
there's other people who have physical marks on their bodies, aren't there? And
Yeah.
or they might wake up in their garden at 3 o'clock in the morning and they're locked out of their house and they don't know how they ended up there.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there is those different things that happen, and the more you get into it, the more complicated it gets, doesn't
W
it?
It is, because I know someone who was fully awake and maintains, even to this day, because at the time he was probably about 18, and he's in his 30s now, that he was being up close to the ceiling, being pulled out of a closed window. He said, "I grabbed the window. It's like it didn't even exist, and I grabbed the side of the house." So he was partially, like, heading out, and then he just went, boom. He goes, "I thank God the bed was close to the window, because it hit the floor hard," right? You're talking like 8 foot ceiling at least, so that's a bit of a drop. So, I don't know, like, that sounds pretty physical to me, yet ethereal at the same time.
Yeah, it's that thing where the ETs seem to be able to take people through the wall or through the window, don't they? As though the wall's not there. Some
Mhm,
kind of technology perhaps that's doing that. If it's
mhm.
not a spiritual thing, maybe spiritual is not the right word, but if they're
Yes,
taking your consciousness,
yes.
it's take you through.
Yes. Yeah, because he goes, "I've had physical marks from dream travel. What's going on in your dreams, Ethan?" That's what I want to know. That's exactly what I wanna know. Ethereal, Carol Ann, my dear friend, also another show here on the network. She goes, "I would think ETs pass as well. Maybe we all meet on the same astral plane."
Yeah, like there are people who have past lives on other planets.
Mhm.
And there's also that thing, some people, when they're being abducted, they complain to the ETs and say, "You got no right to do this. How dare you?" And the ETs say, "But you
Mm.
agreed to this before you were born." And
Yes, the
there's
soul
some
contract,
people,
isn't it?
yeah, and there's also some people who seem that they're in their past life, they were one of the Greys, and that
Mm.
they've come here to kind of help their program, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So, say, "All right, I'll be a human, you can take me and we'll do what we need to do."
Or not. No, but it would
Yeah.
that yeah, I don't know, that would be a bit it'd be interesting, but I know because it's why family lines tend to have that same I spoke to my mom before she passed, and both sides of the family going way back, going, "Oh, yeah, there've been all kinds of, different stories." I'm just like, "Why am I only hearing about this now?" Like, but she goes, "Well, don't you remember this or this?" And I'm like, oddly enough, no, but I do now that you mention it. It's strange. So yeah, I could definitely see that. Wayne, question, Simon, do you feel that ETs are present in some NDEs because they are more interested in our essence than our physical being?
I don't know. I don't come across many near-death experiences where there's any kind of ET presence,
Mm,
and I think they might be in a different space, a different, there's words you can use like dimensions or
yes.
ethereal realm or different universe or something like that. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that and weirder than that. And those are
Mhm,
words we can use that kind of
mhm,
give us an idea of what it might be.
mhm,
But I did talk to a guy who says he has contact with ETs all the time,
mhm,
and it's on a kind of spiritual level for him because he's a medium.
mhm,
And I said to him, "Why is it people don't often go to mediums and their loved ones say, 'Oh, you know what? There's aliens here.' That you've hardly ever never hear that from a medium when their deceased loved ones come through.
mhm,
So you can only think the aliens aren't around in that space.
mhm,
And maybe it's about that thing of being where your frequency takes you."
mhm. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to, well, I guess it depends on the alien. I've had a medium come up to me and he goes, "There's a bit unnerving. There's this sort of reptile thing with you," and he's kind of going like he was trying to pronounce draconian, and I'm it's like charades. I'm going, "What are you trying to say?" I'm going, "Draconian," and he goes, "That's the word." I'm like, "Oh, that's wonderful." Just a guided that was new for me. I had no idea. But he wasn't versed in it. He goes like, "I don't see stuff like that. I'm more of on a different level when I'm reading people. I don't see extraterrestrial." So I guess it varies based on mediumship and abilities. So,
Yeah, and mediums really, lots that I've talked to kind of focus on the light and the good side of things.
mhm,
And I don't know if ETs would show up there so much. Not that
Mhm,
they're really bad or terrible, it's just,
mhm.
again, it might be the frequency.
It could be. It could very well be.
Yeah.
Heidi says, thoughts on vision issues. Random double vision, seeing within my vision colored shapes around a half circle, almost like a symbol, not out in the physical. It's happened to her 3 times in the last 3 years. I believe she's an experiencer too. Had
I've
NDE?
heard sorry, I talked to a guy called Steve Neal, I don't know if you know him,
I've heard the name, yeah, but I've never
and,
met him.
he was talking about when he closes his eyes and, he's going to sleep, he sees a grid pattern that's
Mm,
really bright, and beyond the grid pattern, he sees faces of grey aliens,
mm,
and he's talked to other experiencers who say, "Yeah, I get that as well, this thing sometimes,"
hmm,
and that freaked me out because I get it. But I see the
mm,
grid, but then I see shapes, geometric things. I don't see faces of greys,
mhm,
and that only happens occasionally. And he's an artist, so he drew a picture of what he's seeing, and
mhm,
it was pretty much exactly what I see, this grid pattern.
mhm. Makes you kinda wonder, do you think we're in a matrix? Just the whole grid. I'll go there, because it seems to be, a thing, like, everything technically, you know, universally speaking, a lot is made up of mathematics, right? Frequency, vibration, Tesla always said it's all about mathematics, and you give you that's the key to the universe, so to speak. So it sort of makes you wonder because looks like that would be a form of that. Like when I could sometimes see things if I'm trying to tap in, I don't consider myself a remote viewer by any means, but I can sort of end up in places. And for me, at times, I know this is a bit different, I can see grid patterns. So, whereas a remote viewer or some mediums could look at something, and sometimes I could see if it's a table, it's a table. I could see it's a table. But there are also other times where I will see it looks like the form of a table on a grid.
It's weird, isn't it?
It's very
It's
weird.
it's it's, the more you get into this stuff, the weirder it gets and the more complicated you realize it is.
Mhm. It is, but connected in strange ways. She says, "I do, yes. I always thought that maybe it were memories or movies or something, but I've communicated with ET and received info I would have never known. I've just recently have thought about that myself." So that is that. So, okay, from the guest, thank you, and we love you for listening. Geometrics one sees like ayahuasca and experiences also very interesting. Which I mean, I've heard of mediums that have had to, or hypnotists rather, that have had to deal and try to regress people who've had ayahuasca because of the type of experience, which is either so profound that people just can't seem to bring themselves back out of it. Have you ever encountered anything like that? Because
No, I haven't.
you're into the ethereal at that point, and they just can't seem to function right after that.
I've heard a lot about those ayahuasca and what happens there and
Mhm,
the different things you see
mhm,
it's amazing what's going on and you do wonder if the because it's DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca if that
mhm,
is um, kind
mhm,
of opening your mind up in some way or getting rid of the barriers so you can experience more.
mhm. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, realistically, there's one I know of in Peru, and they'll train you for 2 weeks before you can even have an experience to try to prepare you for things like this, whereas a lot of places don't necessarily. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with how you come out of it. Which brings me to this as having a near death experiences. Let's say you have a near death experience that isn't so great. How do you how do you come out of that? How do you deal with that kind of trauma? Like this is where you come in. I'm guessing people would reach out to you for that as well.
I haven't had people reach out to me for that.
Oh,
These
interesting. Yeah.
distressing near-death experiences, they say, is about 10% of people who have them
Okay.
have a distressing near-death experience. But
Mhm.
I also wonder that there may be more people who are having these awful experiences, but they just don't talk about it.
Mhm.
You know, if you have an experience that's all very loving and wonderful, then you're
Mhm.
happy to tell everyone. Almost a thing like say, "Well, I died and I went to hell." People might look at you and think, "Oh boy, what did
Mhm.
you do that you're going to hell?"
So it's a fear of judgment, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, and also I think some people handle it quite well. Different people
Mhm.
handle different things, and
Mhm.
I talked to a woman who had a terrible near-death experience where her body may have been dead for just 20 minutes or something like that, but
Mhm.
she spent 2 years in hell with these demons and
Oh.
terrible things happening.
Mhm.
But when I talked to her, she seemed quite a happy lady and happy to talk about it.
Mhm.
And it was, not that beforehand she was an awful person at all. She was somebody's mum, and she had a job and living a
Mhm.
life like we all do.
Mhm.
And for some reason, that's the near-death experience she got.
Do you
And,
think she was just under too long? 'Cause
I
20
don't think
minutes seems like a
so.
really long time.
I know. I've got a guy in my book who was, 45 minutes he was
Wow.
dead, and he said parts of his body started to stiffen up. It was like rigor mortis was starting, and
Mhm.
the EMTs found him, and they just put him in a body bag. They thought, "That's it, he's dead."
Mhm.
And it was, he came back to life in the ambulance,
Hmm.
but he didn't have a terrible experience.
Mhm. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if she spent 2 years, and she was gone 20 minutes, is this how time worked in the place, I mean, hell, the place she was at? Or do you think this is just something she was living through, all of her sleeping moments? Like, was this going on like her soul was in 2 different places, or was she walking around without a soul? Like, what makes somebody experience this for 2 years? And meanwhile, you've been brought back after 20 minutes.
Yeah, I know that that's the thing with time and the afterlife.
Mm,
I hear that so often, people with near-death experiences,
mm,
they may have been dead 30 seconds, but they
yeah.
say their near-death experience lasted 5 years for them.
Oh my goodness, see, that's
It's
crazy.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's just a different
yeah.
thing, and, they also say something like, "I can tell you everything that happened in the near-death experience, and I'll tell you these incidents one after the other, but actually, it was like I experienced them all in the same moment. It wasn't one thing
Mhm,
after another."
mm,
And
mhm,
so time is very different there.
mhm. So, what are your thoughts on people who are in comas? Because the spirit leaves the body, and there have been stories of walk-ins, other spirits just coming in, and then when they come out of it, they have no idea, like, that you're my wife or you're my cousin or you're my child, my parent, like, they're somebody totally different. Um, I mean, because some of these people really, they're there for there's cases where people have been there for 15, 20 years, and you know that the spirit is not just staying in the vehicle. Right? They're moving around. Like, this is a big misconception. I don't even think we stay in the body when we sleep. It's like sleeping in your car and leaving it in the garage and just sleeping in your car in the garage. It's just, for me, that's my ideology. It's just you don't do it. You just pop out.
Yeah, I've read a book, and the guy was a guest on my podcast, and the book's
Mhm.
called Coma and Near Death Experience.
Mhm.
And he started out to write a book about coma and what people experience. And he came across so many who told him about their near death experience,
Mhm.
something he'd never had an interest in. It changed him and changed the content of the book.
Mhm.
And it's weird because they call it like a near death experience, like your body has to die for you to have that
Mhm.
experience. But
Mhm.
these people aren't dead.
No,
And then
they're
they have some really awful experiences
mm,
where people have terrible nightmares while they're in the coma.
mhm.
And it's for them, they say it's almost as if this is actually happening. It's not like a dream.
Mhm.
And that these nightmares are on a loop and they just experience it over and over and over.
Hmm.
And there's other people, I find this fascinating, where they have another life on another earth and they say it's just as real as this one. And
Hmm.
there's like a guy who was in a coma for 7 days, lived a life for 22 years on another Earth.
Mhm.
And he had a job, and he'd work 9 to 5, he had an apartment, he'd
Mhm.
do everything that everybody did, have
Mhm.
relationships. He said he fought for a year in a Southeast Asian country that doesn't exist on this Earth.
Mhm.
And that Earth was just slightly different in little ways, like the McDonald's signs were a different color. And then
Mm.
there was a woman who had a life of a few years. She was in a coma for 28 days, and in that life, she got married and had a child, and then she
Mhm.
woke up from the coma. And to her, that life was just as real as this one, and she'd
Mhm.
lost the child.
Yeah,
And the
boy.
people around her and the doctors were saying, "Oh, it's just a dream. You were just hallucinating." And which was a
Mhm.
terrible way to treat her, really. She's got
Mhm.
genuine grief because she's
Yes.
lost this child.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that's fascinating, that the idea of a multiverse and that they were somehow connected to another one of
Mhm.
them in another universe.
Mhm.
And I've also talked to somebody, this came up just once, this guy who was having ET encounters, he was abduction stuff. And it was
Mhm.
like he was being tested. He said he was in this apartment that was really familiar, but he'd never been there before. And just
Mhm.
out the corner of his eye, he'd see someone, then he'd look round and they weren't there. And there were all these photographs on the side, and he was in the photographs with all these
Mhm.
people. He didn't know any of them, and they were all smiling and hugging, and it looked like family and,
Mhm.
partners and things. So
Mhm.
you wonder what's going there. Was this constructed by the ETs, or did they take him to another universe where there was another him living this other life?
See, this it just raises so many questions because there are theories and people actually, researching this, and there's a belief that we live multiple lives, like you say, a multiverse, multiple lives simultaneously at the exact same time. So, are we slipping in and out of that? I mean, as wonderful, incredible as it sounds that this could be a thing, I would just have such a hard time. I was asked by a guest at one time on the show, goes, if you could, travel, shift into a time that was a little bit kinder, let's say, but still within, your family, still have your family. I thought, I don't know, because if times are tumultuous and you have your family, you're supposed to support one another, you want to be there for them. I don't know, could I slip into another time and know maybe somehow that I still have family that I love here that are still going through a really tumultuous time? But it was led under the belief that you could. I mean, time slips happened all the time. There's so many different, stories. One woman actually has a reward out right now because she woke up in this time in her apartment, but things look different, just like what you were just describing. Things look different. Her fiance wasn't there. Her stepdaughter wasn't there. She'd been with this man 7 years. Her place of work was the same, just a different building, like all of the stuff. And she's like, anybody that can help me get back to my timeline. So she's fully aware of it. Just woke up, but it's completely this timeline. So there's that
Yes.
that morning thing again, not being able to
Yeah.
how do you function with
Yeah.
something like that?
And I read about a girl, and I think this happened in Poland, but it was 1915, that 1916, a year
Mhm,
that long ago. And she was 15 and she died, but then she spontaneously came back, and she was speaking a foreign language and they couldn't understand her. And eventually they worked out it was Spanish, and they got somebody in who could speak Spanish.
mhm,
And this girl was saying, "No, I'm a middle-aged woman. I live in Madrid." And she started talking about all this, what they do in Madrid and where
mhm,
she lived, and they found that a lot of what this girl was saying was correct. And also this thing up, if it wasn't a walk-in,
mhm.
how on earth did she learn Spanish?
Well,
Like, to talk like that when she died for a few seconds and came back again.
mhm,
And she talks about how they would have this pot that was the like a tri there was a tripod of steel rods with these
mhm,
chains, and you put the pot in the middle, and you'd think, "Oh, that's for cooking." But she said, "No, that was the heating. You'd put all your hot coals in there, and that would heat the room up." And then people did research and found that that's what they used to do in Madrid. How could she possibly know that?
See? Like how it's like you live an entire life in a few seconds. Here's another one. I remember Wayne talking about this one. He goes, I heard of a story recently about a student that was knocked out on a football field, woke up in the hospital. The nurse became his wife, had 2 kids, and then things went bad. He said he noticed a lamp that was casting an odd shadow and he focused on it. He suddenly woke up, still on the field. It was so vivid that he had to go to trauma counseling for several years to cope with the loss of his wife and children. He was unconscious for only a minute or two, but in his mind, he was gone for several years. Pretty much what we were just talking about.
Yeah, I think I've heard that,
Yeah, it's a
uh,
fairly new one.
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, with the lamp and
Yeah.
saying, "Hang on a second, that's not right. There's something wrong with that lamp." Like there's
Yeah.
a glitch in the matrix.
See? It makes you wonder. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that where hypnosis would come in handy as well? Like, you could sort of work with somebody like that, and do you bring the other person forward, or do you have to help this current essence adjust to being in this time? Like, how do you even help somebody like that?
I know that'd be really difficult. It
Yeah.
might be that thing of taking them into the space where hopefully they'd meet their spirit guide and they could ask the spirit guide what's going on here.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's like you say, there's the multiverse and there's many, many versions of ourselves living these different lives
Mhm.
and making these different decisions. And
Mhm.
it's all part of the soul, just learning stuff.
Mm. That's there's so many different things that like we're very powerful beings. I believe, we are the way things are, the way we're constructed, the way the universe is constructed, whatever it is, dimensions. I don't think we actually know till we get there. And even then, if you're sort of popped back into a space that you're unfamiliar with, it would be, I don't know, it would be traumatizing, but maybe for somebody else, they're coming into a better situation. But I don't
Yeah.
know, you know?
Also, I suppose there's a thing you if you're knocked out on the football field and
Yeah.
then you go and live a life for 20 years and then
Yeah.
suddenly you wake up on the football field, you think, "This is great. I'm 20 years younger."
Exactly. But this poor kid sitting there, like, had a wife, a child, or children, and so it's interesting to me how we come back to this place with no recollection through reincarnation. It's just like, nope, it's getting thrown in a mix. You're gonna get this right. You're gonna have this experience, and you're just because we come back obviously to have the experience, to evolve to a better our better selves, I suppose, throughout consciousness. But you can't remember anything. But yet you have these poor people who are only gone for a short period of time, not even necessarily deceased if we're looking at people who are in comas, and they are traumatized because of these losses that they've suffered. I guess we're kind of coming back full circle to what we were talking about, all the loves that we have felt and the losses that we had. Could we survive that in this time and space, knowing
Yeah.
that we've left someone behind?
But then there's children with past life memories, and there seems to be so many cases that are
Yes.
really powerful there. And
Yeah.
there's a lady who's on my podcast called Jenny Cockle. She's
Mhm.
in her 50s and she remembers past lives. And
Yes.
TV companies made documentaries about her because she's so accurate in
Wow.
talking about the past life and everything's confirmed. So
Wow.
some people do remember this stuff. Children tend to start forgetting it around age 7 and
Mhm.
just move on and then live their life.
Mhm. Yeah, it's super interesting to hear the children because it still comes from a place where they have that innocence. So they haven't been, I say, corrupted by life, which is, job,
Yeah.
responsibilities, things that children don't have to worry as much about, you know, paying the bills, things like that. Where I think one's responsibility starts to set in, and in some cases conditioning, then a lot of that tends to disappear. So when you have like a 3 or 4-year-old who's coming out with these huge stories, I tend to wonder if it's parents saying, "Don't be silly, that's not true," and then they back off from it, as opposed to Well, tell me about it and let's look into it.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to deal with it as well. It may be distressing for the kid if you
Mhm,
discount and play it down and say, "Oh, no, that's not real," when it can be very real for the child.
mhm,
And the initial original research done by Ian Stevenson, he had to travel to India and Sri Lanka and places like that because they believe in reincarnation much more there. So when the children were talking about this stuff, the
mhm,
parents would accept it and investigate and just talk to them about it.
mhm,
Whereas in the Western world, we don't, do we? We think, oh, the kid's got such a great imagination, and
mhm,
okay, we've heard enough of that. Come on, let's move on now.
mhm.
And we don't
Well,
learn so much over here.
Well, I think it's also, I mean, even growing up in my time, and I'm aging myself a little bit, but your parents saying, "Okay, we don't talk about that." Any of the high strangers in the family, we don't talk about that because the neighbors. So it's like, oh, so it's a family secret. So don't talk about anything weird, is what you're saying. So I mean, that's how I grew up, even though within the household. Because I came from a family like, that had mediumship ability, so we could talk about it. But there was always a concern of what everybody else would think. So that it hindered you a little bit that way. But children they tell it like it is. I was always like that with my children. They would say things and I'd be like, wonderful. That's great. You just keep talking, But not that children can't get into the tall tale. So I just gotta watch them, but it is interesting. Um, Dreams. Um, this I believe there's dreams. I believe there's sometimes you kind of go back to other places. And this is one situation I remember Wayne telling me about this. It goes, in one of my dreams, I arrived in an area that looked like what looked like be Arizona. Many Aboriginal people who were dead. I went to each one of them, placed my hand on their body, and told them it wasn't their time, and told them to wake up. And after they were all alive again, I made a counterclockwise motion in the air, and a purple oval opened up in the air, and I simply stepped into it, which to me is a portal. I've seen purple portals. And I know my co-host Amelia has many times. So, what is that? Are we dreaming, or is this actually happening in this? We're just traveling. The traveling dreams.
Yeah, I know. I suppose it's whether how vivid the dream is.
Hmm.
I had a dream last night that was just madness, all these crazy things happening, and it makes me wonder if, they say you have so many dreams a night, and
Hmm.
I spend my whole night living in these crazy situations. But
Maybe.
occasionally you have a very vivid dream that's
Hmm.
not that crazy.
Hmm.
A few months after my mother-in-law died, I had this very vivid dream where she walked into the room and she sat down, and I sat down on another chair, and I just looked at her and I said, "You've just come to tell me you're okay, haven't you?" And she smiled and just nodded her head. And
Hmm.
that was the whole dream. But it
Hmm.
was very powerful in a way, and there was a feeling to it that I've
Hmm.
never had before, and it was
Hmm.
so vivid, and I can see it in my mind right now.
Hmm.
And like the dream I had last night, I only have very vague memories of it now. I can just picture one scene of it, but that one stays with me.
Yeah, it's like, what was that? Well, and there is a belief that if you remember every detail, that it's some sort of either visitation or traveling dream perhaps, whereas the rest is just dreams and it tends to be jumbled. I used to be a very big lucid dreamer. I could fast forward, I could rewind, I could circle around, I could relive the same thing. If I'm having a good time, I could get in there and just keep redoing it. Then I became a mother and never slept again when I opened. And so I never fell back into, I think, those deep dreams. But I have started becoming more aware now of the ones that, like you just described, the visitation with your mother-in-law. You remember it so clearly because, and it felt differently than even like looking at Wayne's traveling dreams. I've had things like that where you remember every detail. You don't have to think about it. If you have to reach for it, chances are you're just having scattered watched a movie that day, and somehow you're just getting bits and pieces of that film. And I've learned to recognize those as well. So it is very interesting. But when we're talking about, getting into like the different universes or timelines, when he was 4 years old, he was at his own birthday party, and all of a sudden he got physically sick all over the place, and he basically went, "Oh my God!" He looked at himself and at his hands, and he looked and goes, "Oh my God, I'm a child again."
Oh,
Poor kid, 4 years old. I just realized, oh my God, I'm back. What is that? I mean, see, he's a candidate for
yeah.
hypnosis, this guy. Because, because that is like, what is that? Is that, in your experience of working with people in past lives, or having these near-death experiences or traveling experiences, what is that? Is that a step in? Like, how do you just realize, oh my God, I'm a child, and you've been, even as a child, living for 4 years?
Yeah, it does sound like a reincarnation connection there, doesn't it? That's what I would say. It's my
Yeah.
first thought. And
Yeah.
I don't know, but my daughter was 4 years old. This has only ever happened once. She
Yeah.
said to me, I used to pick you up when you were this small. And it's that thing of, where did that come from? And I
Yes.
asked her straight away. I said, "What was that?" And she said, "What? I didn't say anything."
Yeah.
So
See.
that was weird, and that sounds like reincarnation. And so
Mhm.
you start to wonder, was she my grandmother, or was she my mother, or what's
Mhm.
going on here?
Mhm. Yeah, little kids say things like that. "When you were my mom, you used to do this," or when, like my grandson will look at me and he'll say, "Oh, well, when I was a man, I did this or this." I'd be just going, "It's great." I don't should I encourage this or just roll with it? Like, just which way do you go? Because they are at that age, where they'll come out with things. But it's just what, they seem to have this really amazing recollection, even if it is for just a little while. Maybe, I don't know, like, are they full awareness? Because some of them do come out with this huge, "Oh, I've died here. This is my wife's name. I'm buried here." Whereas others are just coming out with snippets, but
Yeah,
interesting.
I did hear read about one child who would complain about things.
Yes.
Like like they'd say, "I used to have a swimming pool. We used to have a big car. How can you expect me to live in these conditions?"
Yeah. This is not, I can't live like this. Something's
Yeah.
totally wrong. So, I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to I'm posting your link again. Guys, just quickly, I am posting Simon's link right here again. So go grab it, go peruse the website. It's excellent. Um, okay, another question, because I know we are nearing our time limit. April says, if you have special abilities, do you think a person will still have those abilities if you come back again? Sorry if this is already covered. No, we haven't covered this. I had to leave a couple
I
times. So,
suppose
yeah.
I wonder what it does it mean by abilities? Does that mean psychic, or being a
Yeah.
medium, or does it mean
Yeah.
playing the guitar, or being a great mechanic?
I would think
I have
any.
heard
Yeah.
that a couple of people have got this idea that maybe you learn the piano in one life, and then the next life you learn it a bit more, the next one you just get better and better as a pianist, and then
Mhm.
eventually you find these 5-year-olds who can play like Mozart,
Mhm.
who are just incredible musicians right from the
Like
beginning.
savants,
Yeah, yeah.
these
So
people come back incredibly gifted, and you're just like, like savants. They end up being like concert pianists, and he's like 3.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
there's something to be said for all of that. I think, what you do is great, and it's just not everybody, and I say this lightly because I've had people try to hypnotize me, and it's a stretch. So you have to be, patient. So have you ever encountered somebody that you just, because I mean, if you want it bad enough, people come to you for a regression or just to kind of tap into what happened when I had this NDE. Have you encountered people where you just can't? Maybe it's not
It's a
not their time yet, or, you
There
know?
is a thing within hypnosis where they say all hypnosis is self-hypnosis.
Mm,
And I use the same technique for everybody,
mhm.
and 99% of people will get into the past lives.
Beautiful.
There's occasionally people who don't,
Mhm,
and there can be different reasons for why it just doesn't work. There might be that they've booked the session to be in the evening and they've had a bad day at work, a
mhm,
bad commute home, and they're very stressed and they
mhm,
can't focus on it because you need to follow the guidance of
mhm,
the hypnotist when you're going through the induction into hypnosis.
mhm,
And some people can be very nervous when we start.
mhm,
There's a kind of excited, nervous, and they go straight into it, no problem. And occasionally, it's almost like people they want it so badly that that blocks them. They
mhm,
really want to see a past life, and they
mhm,
stumble while we're going through it. And I've been
mhm,
hypnotized a lot. When I was at college learning clinical hypnotherapy, we used to practice on each other every day.
mhm,
And I know what it's like sometimes. There's somebody's doing the hypnotic induction with you, and
mhm.
your mind just wanders. You think about what you're going to watch on TV tonight and what you had for dinner yesterday, and you're
Right,
not really listening to the hypnotist.
right, right.
But just bring
Mhm,
yourself back to it and just follow them.
mhm. So when people go under and you're hearing your voice, which is all they should be concentrating on. Are you still hearing everything else that's going on? So if somebody says something, let's say in the next room, are you still going to pick that up?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
you're still aware of your surroundings and you
Yeah.
feel like you could stop anytime you want. It's just being very, very
Yeah.
relaxed.
Mhm. Yeah.
And yeah, you remember everything. It's not like you're unconscious or something.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I love that, and, I guess I was talk to Wayne. I think he needs this because I can't believe the things that have happened to this person. I'm just like, you
Yeah.
need to figure out what is going on, where you come from, because I always say, you're one of those ethereal light worker people who, some people may call you an angel. So I will often say, "Where are your wings?" Because you just have people who just really genuine, good humans, as I call them, and he often gets those same type of travel dreams where he's like always assisting. So it's just like there's something there. Now it's just very, very curious. So in doing hypnosis, do you do them all live or do you do some via Zoom? Can you do them remotely?
Yeah, it's all on Zoom.
Oh,
I
wonderful.
started that, when COVID was around, there's a
Yeah.
lockdown,
Mhm,
and it works so well. It's just about hearing a voice and
mhm,
following guidance, because the whole time you're hypnotized, your eyes are closed
mhm.
and you don't need to see the people. You don't need to be in the same room with them. It's
You
like
do that.
mediums can do readings
Yeah.
from around the other side of the world. It's some kind of energetic connection between people.
Mhm,
And I think for some people, it's better to do it on Zoom than being in person,
mhm.
particularly for a woman. I mean, if you
Yes.
went to a hypnotist's office and there's this guy and say, you
Mhm,
never met him before, he says, "Oh, now sit in this chair and I'm going to hypnotize you." That
mhm.
might not be the most
No,
comforting
you're
space
right.
to be in.
You're right, and realistically, all they have to do is be able to hear your voice, and maybe being in the
Yeah.
comfort of their own space, it would be easier where that you feel safer to just slip through. I think that's
Yeah.
excellent. So where I know we're at the end, where can everybody find your book?
Yeah, the book's on Amazon worldwide,
Mhm,
and it's also you could probably get it at Barnes& and Noble, places like that. I don't
mhm,
think they'd have it on the shelf. You'd have to go in and order it or order it from their website,
mhm,
and it's on ebook and paperback and audiobook,
mhm,
and yeah, and if you wanna talk to me about hypnosis, you can go onto my website
mhm,
and go into my booking page and book a free 20-minute consultation, and we
mhm.
could talk about what you want to achieve if you did a past life regression.
There you go. And so, guys, throughout the stream, the website has been there, and we've had it up also in the last probably 15 minutes of the show. So you can go back and pull it from there. It's also in the show description. So we make it nice and easy, no matter which
Yeah.
platform you're on, where the archive will be. Go into the show description and just do a copy and paste, and Bob's your uncle. So, Simon, thank you so much for joining me this evening for you, this afternoon for us on this side of the world. It was a wonderful conversation, and I just love the whole different theories that just take our essences into other places that there's no rhyme or reason for it, and that you were able to
Yeah.
literally get in there and help retrieve that information, because not everybody can do that. A lot of people will say they can do that, but not a lot of people can do that.
It's been really good talking to you. It's been a nice conversation.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Well, maybe we'll do it again. I'm sure you're versed in many things, and I'd love to hear anything else you'd love to talk
Yeah.
about. I'd love to do it again.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Aw, thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us. For everybody else, guys, The Outer Realm tomorrow night with Debbie Dachinger, Close Encounters of the Ancient Kind, ET interactions with humanity. Has it happened? If so, when, where, and how? Or should we say why? Anyway, also Thursday, Constance Victoria Briggs returns talking about Stargates, USOs, hidden bases, all that fun stuff. She's awesome. So it's going to be a fun-filled week. Thank you all. Goodbye, good night, good afternoon, and we'll see you tomorrow night.